Welcome to ScalaWags, episode 20.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the only podcast on the internet where we are too cheap to get something pre-recorded for the intro. I am Daniel Spiewak, and there are other people with me who will introduce themselves.
I'm Dick Wall.
Steph Tissue.
And I'm the crazy pirate guy.
Can I just say,
He doesn't have a name.
20 in your face, 19. We made it to 20. We are double pod
I'm sure
fade.
19 feels that burn right now.
We are double pod fade numbers already. We are not pod fading.
And one more we can drink. Oh gosh, one too early.
Oh jeez. I've been drinking since I was an infant, apparently.
Just don't tell my parents, that's all. Please.
Just between friends.
Put it in a paper bag.
Okay. Or a printout of work.
It's like in some states where as long as there's a straw, then it doesn't actually count as drinking.
Have you ever drunk beer through a straw? You get drunk really quick. It was a trick we used at university. That and cough mix. If you take some cough mix and then go out drinking, way cheaper to get drunk.
I would imagine.
Yeah. I know all the tricks back then.
We received some feedback from a listener that we never explain what we're talking about before we talk about it. So does someone want to make a stab at explaining what this episode is about before we start arguing about it?
Maybe Pirate Guy, who is currently muted.
What? I dropped out because...
I was going to say, there's two Joshes now. It's like there's Josh, and then there's Josh's evil twin.
Exactly.
Well,
Crazy hall of mirrors.
For this episode, one of me will love the one side, and the other of me will hate everything that we say. So it'll work out pretty well, I think.
I'm sorry, I have to laugh because Dot came in. She's walked up. She's right here, and she's showing off the bone that she just got from her mum to me. So she's very proud of it. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
So speaking of being proud of bones, because this episode has nothing to do with that.
Cool segue, bro.
Yeah, that's really smooth.
Yeah, we're talking about, there was a blog post today from the Typelevel organization, particularly Miles Sabin, who we interviewed in our last episode about Shapeless. Shapeless is a library in the Typelevel ecosystem. And for those of you who didn't have a chance to read the post, it calls for essentially faster movement in Scala and forking the Scala ecosystem. I don't want to. I use the term ecosystem because it's interesting. If you read the article, we can dig into some of the points. But part of it is that to improve the compiler itself and tools around the compiler quicker than is currently being done, and specifically to help the libraries in the Typelevel ecosystem get better and improve. So it's pretty interesting stuff, the plans here. So we just wanted to have a little discussion about it, what we think, that sort of thing.
So would it be fair to describe Typelevel as like the side of the Scala community that thinks that Scala is not hardcore enough on functional programming?
I think that's a somewhat unfair characterization.
Yeah. I
would say that half of the Scala community would characterize them as that, and they would not characterize themselves as that. So
no, that's probably slightly more accurate.
So they would cross out the word hardcore and write in
correct
principled.
Principled?
Right?
No. Yeah. I guess principled is a decent word.
So I mean, I would describe it as a section of the Scala community that is interested in more higher order abstractions than are currently represented in common, quote, mainstream Scala code. Some of these higher order abstractions come from category theory, some of them come from Haskell, some of them are just like good ideas that people have had. But I would say the general theme of it is try to do try to do more things with less code in more general ways.
I would actually kind of just add to that a little bit, which is to say, instead of characterizing them as the hardcore typey guys, I think a good definition is these are some of the earliest adopters of Scala. They were some of the earliest supporters of Scala, partly through the fact that they've been just using it longer than everyone else. They have got further and deeper into the corners and the nooks and crannies of the system, and are very interested in that. And I had this kind of philosophical discussion with Miles about how that happens and how the kind of gravitation towards this more what I term type foolery happens. It's like what can we do with this amazing type system we've got in Scala?
I would actually argue that I think this might be a bad categorization, but I think that the type level community cares more about the abstractions they're trying to express than the particular language in which they're expressing them. I.e., they're trying to push a style of development that favors completely referential transparent code, and they're trying to push Scala in this direction. Whereas the rest of the Scala community is like, holy crap, it's not Java.
A large part of it now is. That's true, and that's that's a growing part.
There's an element of getting paid to not write Java that is just wonderful. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. I remember the first time I got a job where I was like only doing Scala. I was kind of bubbling about it for like 2 months. But there is definitely that push towards referential transparency across most of the type level projects. I mean, I think there's projects that are in the type level ecosystem which very definitely have publicly exposed features which are most certainly not referentially transparent, and they make no bones about that. But I would say that the majority of the people that are involved in these projects would, given a choice, use highly referentially transparent constructs if they can.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to name names on this these features that you're vaguely referring to?
Isn't specs under type level?
Oh, I think so, but now I have to bring up.
Hold on.
Now you should know what's not referentially transparent, because the entire specs to DSL.
Here are the list of projects that are underneath type level. Okay, so we have Argonaut, Monocle, ScalaCheck, ScalaZ, SCodec, Shapeless, Specs2, and Spire.
So Spire and SCodec both expose very, very mutable things in places, and they do this for performance reasons. And they're very, very clear about, and there's always a referentially transparent way of achieving it if you're willing to take the performance hit. But they expose these for reasons that are obvious. Like with SCodec, for example, you're writing binary protocols. You sometimes want to be able to sit like right on an NIO channel and just read stuff out of the kernel. SCodec allows you to do that, even though it is highly imperative and unsafe. Because sometimes you need to, and they don't want to prevent you from doing that in a highly performant manner.
Yeah, I would argue that, if you look at this list of libraries, I would say almost everyone in the Scala ecosystem uses one of these.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Yeah, ScalaZ's a really common one. Shapeless is relatively common.
Shapeless,
ScalaCheck,
Specs2.
ScalaCheck and Specs2 are basically in everyone's class path. So this is a big sub part of the ecosystem, and these are very, very, very influential projects.
Yeah, the other thing is they're working on a bunch of helper compiler plugin things. Like there's a discipline plugin. There's the Kind projector. If you're familiar with this guy, the Kind projector is a project which allows you to, if I recall correctly, allows you to define higher kinded types.
I think it's a replacement for type lambda, or a way of getting partial type application without changing Scala's syntax,
right.
Just by basically reinterpreting some syntax that's already there.
Yeah, so it's actually a compiler plugin that just rewrites your code. It was pretty clever, actually. There's Wart Remover, which is kind of like a linter.
Yeah.
And then there's a bunch of contrib projects for Spire, Shapeless, that sort of thing that work with the other type level projects.
Yeah.
So it's pretty...
Yeah, those tend to be not like external contribs in the traditional sense. They tend to be like, Miles wants to write some stuff that interoperates with ScalaZ, but he doesn't want it to be in the Shapeless class path, and vice versa. So there's a lot of, if you're using Shapeless and you're using ScalaZ and you have them both on your class path, there's absolutely no reason why you wouldn't have the contrib projects as well, because they're so good and they bring things together really tightly.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that in their manifesto, you might call it, that was published today on the Typelevel blog, that they come right out swinging with the word fork, which is like the fourth word in the blog post.
Four-letter F word, man. Those are bad.
It's the F word.
They're just referring to the button they're pressing on GitHub. That's all they're doing.
You say that in jest, but I actually believe there's an element of truth to what you're saying there, Daniel. I've been trying to explain this to people today, that particularly now with GitHub around, there really are two kinds of forks. There's the divergent fork, which is I don't like what you're doing, I'm going to take something in an entirely new direction and, basically just fork the hell out of it.
Yeah, right.
And then there's
in you could call Scala a fork of Java.
Yes, you could. I mean, a fairly far removed one. It's a bit like comparing, somewhere in my ancestry, I believe King John is like in my ancestry tree, because he is pretty much in anyone who's lived in England for long enough. But it's fairly removed at this point. I'm not about to be able to rescind the Magna Carta or anything like that. But
he had to done a ring.
That was a real nerdy joke, by the way, so sorry about that.
If you're going to bring up history, I have to ask, is the United States a fork of the United Kingdom?
Well, yes, it kind of is, and an unofficial one, according to some sources.
We have statesmen instead of kings. That's the big difference.
Anyway, but then there's the other fork, the other kind of fork, which is what people do in GitHub all the time, which is actually kind of like a +1 on your project. They're like, hey, this is really cool. I want to do something with this. I want to fork it, make a copy myself, work on it like a feature branch, do some stuff, and send pull requests in. And well, not everybody, but a lot of people look to the negative of forking. But I think GitHub has really kind of turned it around into something that's very positive and collaborative. And if Miles's post doesn't say that pretty clearly, I don't know what else it says. I mean, it's like he's talking about basing it on the type-safe compiler, keeping it merge compatible. All of that is laid out in there. It's a very collaborative and clear, I think, post on that.
Yeah, I think one thing that is really deserves emphasis is that one of the primary explicit goals of this project is to contribute pull requests back to type-safe. Like that right there implies merge compatibility, but it also implies that they're trying to stay close enough and they're trying to actually have this be a two-way street. It's not like, here's our extra special extension of type-safe stuff that we're going to leech on their work. It's, we want to kind of push the envelope in a slightly different direction that maybe they don't have the time or resources in, and we're going to try to keep pitching stuff back in their direction as much as they're interested in it.
Yeah, it's hard to say it.
The reality is, though, it's not that they're pushing code back to TypeSafe, because Scala is actually owned between TypeSafe and EPFL. I believe EPFL is the true owner, and we have some sort of legal deal with them. So the Scala thing, GitHub project is like the sole source of Scala right now, and both EPFL and TypeSafe contribute. TypeSafe happens to have the most contributors right now, I guess.
Yeah, that is a significant distinction.
Yeah,
which actually is not true. Most pull requests actually come from external to TypeSafe people, or so I hear from the Scala team.
Yeah, we actually discussed this a bit today, but one of the things that did come out is that a lot of those pull requests have been tackling bugs versus new features. And I think that is, what it comes down to, I think we can honestly say, is the mechanism for supplying new features and new feature sets in their entirety with all of the responsibility and work that goes with that. It's not that, that's not to be underestimated. That process could definitely use some refinement and improvement. And I think, I'm just gonna go out and say Miles is a cool guy. We like Miles. He's one of the good guys. We want to keep him as part of the community, and he's done us a favor by pointing out some of the shortcomings, and it's time to fix those. It's time to really get in and kind of figure out, well, yeah, we need to do something about this.
I think in the blog post, one of the more interesting passages is at the end when Miles says, quote, to that end, we believe that it is time for the formation of an independent, non-profit, open-source foundation to safeguard the interests of the entire Scala community. So it's not clear if that foundation would be sort of specific to the type level effort or whether he's proposing that the model for the whole language change to be something more like the way Python and Ruby work, where the sort of central organization for the language is an independent nonprofit. So there's stuff in the post that's a specific call for specific directions that people behind Typelevel would like to see Scala go. But regardless of what you think of those specifics, I really like the idea of the kind of center of gravity behind Scala shifting away from TypeSafe, not because there's anything wrong with TypeSafe, but just because TypeSafe is a company, and that's not the best home for an open source language. It's complicated because EPFL is in the picture as well, but I think that like a lab at a university is probably also not the ideal home for an open source language. Like the academic thing is its own thing with its own rules, its own sources of money and so forth. It's like a separate thing. So I'm really curious whether that aspect of what Miles suggests in this post might actually happen.
Well, so I guess the question is the gravity of I'm trying to phrase this properly, but I think the gravity of Scala is with Martin. That's like he's the benevolent dictator, sort of a thing.
And I find that an I'm not, I'm not leading the conversation or even sure where I'm going with it. But you mentioned both Python and Ruby. Those are both examples of a community that does have a benevolent dictator, a single benevolent dictator. There's Mats for Ruby and there's Guido for Python. And, that clearly works. Along those lines, while I think if you look at any process, there's room for improvement, Scala does have some of these mechanisms. And they've, much like Scala has borrowed from pretty much every other language out there, things like the SIPs are pretty much drawn directly from PEPs from Python, for example, and things like that. These are defined, and I think if I've got to be brutally honest, I should make it clear my opinions, but I think what maybe needs to be addressed with the SIPs is the SIP mechanism is there, but the rest of the process to take place after that is not nearly as clear as it should be. So people, and I think there's a certain amount of misunderstanding that people can define a SIP and do a lot of work on it and then kind of expect it to happen. And in none of the other communities is this the case.
Right. I think this is something that really kind of changed about the Scala world when TypeSafe started, was that before everyone could see that Martin's lab at EPFL was not big enough to do everything that everyone might want out of Scala. But when there's a when there's a company involved, then I think this feeling develops of that's everything's TypeSafe's job. And that's we really should not be in that mindset. If people are in that at all, we need to we need to get out of it. Like, I mean, for a lot of reasons. I mean, for one thing, it's not possible. Like, TypeSafe isn't that big. You know, there isn't some giant gusher of money behind it.
There are several, the official line, there are several full-time engineers dedicated to working, paid to work on the Scala compiler. That several should give you a clue that we're not talking about dozens of engineers here, and there's a lot of work to do. And if stuff that's positive that's coming out of this is, yes, we absolutely want more people, more eyes, more hands, more effort going into Scala. And that is, as Miles put it, I actually had a pretty long conversation with him last week. He doesn't believe this is something TypeSafe can fix. He used those words. It has to come. A community solution has to come from the community, and so that's kind of where this effort is moving from, and that's the way it should be. I think that possibly your point is very good, Seth. I think that possibly. People are so used to, and let's face it, people look at Scala, and it's inevitable that you're going to start drawing some conclusions or some parallels with the Java world. And in the Java world, you have a huge corporate backer that has virtually limitless, bottomless pockets, and a very opinionated leader.
Bottomless pockets that are full of yachts.
Yes, racing yachts made of carbon fiber.
Every time they get into those pockets, like yachts fall out, and they don't even notice.
Yeah, pretty much. And people see another company backing a language, and I think that it's hard not to kind of make that connection and say, oh, they're going to do all the work now, much like Oracle does. Now, people also don't realize that there's a lot of downside to that. The discussion I had, as soon as Miles sort of started saying, well, community involved leadership and stuff, I said not the JCP. That was my initial reaction. Was let's not get caught up in something like a JCP, because that led to such a stagnation of the Java language for so long, and it's moving again now. But it's moving because I think, frankly, the profit motive changed, and Oracle's in charge. And they want to get some stuff done and make more money, and I think that is the primary reason why the whole JCP thing started to, and the Java language started to move again. So
let's talk a little bit about the Scala SIP process. Like I actually sat on the committee. Seth, were you ever on the committee? I don't remember.
No.
No? Okay, you were on the list of people to invite if we couldn't get enough community people at the time. I forget who actually sat on the committee at that time. But it was Martin, someone at TypeSafe, someone at EPFL, and then we tried to get 2 community members. Is generally how that would work. And I was the lucky one from TypeSafe that got selected. But the way the SIP committee works right now is you get a proposal, you look at the proposal, you discuss it on the SIP mailing list. There's lots of people put all sorts of angst and hate around it. And then the SIP committee votes on what should be included in Scala. And then someone has to implement it, right? And there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. You hit the void. Not only does someone have to implement it, you need to test it. Where most of the SIPs ran out of steam was you would implement the SIP and have it working, and it would have localized tests, and then you would test it with all the other features in Scala, and it just fell over and died. And a lot of early Scala features.
To Compilers 101.
Yeah, well, a lot of early Scala features never really had the gas pedal on for testing, in the sense that if you look at specialization that hit in 2.10, not specialization, value classes, the initial design of value classes was about this big, and we found all these corner cases, and we just shrank down where they were allowed until it worked, right?
That's good design right there. That's the epitome of good design.
I don't know.
They made value classes a lot less useful than they really, really should be. Like right now,
ideally,
a very, very narrow subset of what they should be.
Yeah, and what they should be was the initial SIP, right? But from SIP to completion, that whole process is undefined. It was relative. I don't want to say chaos, but it was a little crazy. Trying to deliver that on 2.10. And mostly it was just, we didn't have a formal, like, okay, there's a specification of like tests that you have to write and have pass. Here are the features that you need your feature to interact with, to look at, and that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, part of that, like, I'm sorry to cut you off a little bit, but like part of that is just because language design is hard. I mean, I do have a lot of beef to sort of pick at the Scala C test suite, and we can go through my list of demands, but like the language design is really, really, really hard because of this issue right here. You put a feature into your calculus, and it touches like 17 other things, but you have to think really hard to realize that it touches those 17 other things, and you have to know those 17 other things really, really, really intimately. And usually there's not many people who can hold an entire language in their head. I think for Scala we have maybe 3 or 4 right now, total, in the world, who I could say definitively, yeah, here's a new feature I want to put into Scala, tell me what these things touch.
I would say the number is probably a little higher than 3 or 4, and that the ones that can are likely to be, fairly. There's a high gravitational pull towards the type level group in the people who maybe know it that well.
Well, so remember that some of this knowledge comes from just working on the compiler. So it's definitely going to bias towards people who work on the compiler full time.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say though is that how, as a community member, I want to do that work. Like, I'm willing to sit down and write the tests and things, and I want to make a contribution. How can I go from SIP to completion? If I make a SIP and it gets approved, that's only 10% of the battle.
Yeah.
Then I want to go through this work of adding these tests and stuff. How do you even make that happen? And I think that this blog post clearly outlines that piece is missing. Type level might actually give a nice incubator for features like this, where you can actually prototype them and get a feel for what they are. So when your SIP comes out, you have this type level prototype people are using in production, and you can flesh out these issues in a more aggressive branch of Scala that people who want the stability aren't going after. So you can actually find things like that,
And think of PLC like beta Scala.
Let's not overlook the fact that such an incubator wouldn't just incubate new language features. It would incubate new language feature designers and new language experts. Oh. So that's also a very positive thing. You give people the chance to learn. People learn from mistakes. It's going to happen. Your SIPs are going to come out, and people are going to. Yeah, I'm reminded of the work that Neil Gafter did on closures for Scala. For Java. Never make that mistake anymore. Apparently, I do now. But yeah, he did a ton of work on it. It was good work. It didn't make it in, and I think in hindsight, I was a big fan of, let's get them in there at the time. It felt like Java really wasn't moving anywhere, and this was a good feature. I do think that the Project Lambda probably did a better job in the end at integrating a feature in a way that felt kind of very natural in Java without breaking too much stuff. It's the right thing for Java, was what it was. But those mistakes needed to be made, and they needed to be made in a sandbox that proved an effective place to do it, and we're lacking that sandbox. That's a big part of this. Is let's get a sandbox out there. Let's get more people experimenting. Where's the downside?
So I want to comment. We have a bunch of Q&A people. There's
I noticed that
discussion in there, but Simon Oceanreither just completely agreed with everything we said. He might have actually said it first. I don't know, but he said I think Typelevel Scala could be the perfect incubator for practical SIP. Practical in the sense that first the implementation, then ship it in Typelevel Scala to battle test it, then draft a SIP, taking real-world experience into account. So we're not getting just blind SIPs, essentially. We're getting somebody who's really tried something.
Something to sort of rein in the enthusiasm there just a little bit. Knowing the Typelevel project, I doubt that they are going to be particularly enthusiastic about battle testing certain classes of changes. So an example that obviously was contentious in the past with many people that are now currently involved in Typelevel was the SIP which introduced try, right? That was a SIP. That was a SIP that had to be battle tested somewhere. I can virtually guarantee that if something like that happened now, it would not get battle tested in Typelevel Scala. This is not like a completely I don't know the word I'm looking for, but it's not completely just for battle testing Scala features. It's not meant to be just like a fringe whatever we think we want to put into Scala Project Coin sort of thing. It's very specifically, hey, these are these things. There's a set of things that we think should be in Scala that falls under a very specific subset of the things that everyone in the world thinks should be in Scala, and we want to work on these things.
So that's that. Yeah, it's specific to the Typelevel community and the libraries.
Yeah.
The question then that I think of is, do we need a what is it? Project Darwin? No, Da Vinci, the Da Vinci machine.
Oh, Da Vinci, yeah.
Something like that, where there you can just throw a whole bunch of experiments into a Scala and release it, and people can try it out on their own randomly.
I was going to ask the question slightly different. Well, not really a question. I was going to put a slightly different spin on the ball, I guess, which is, Daniel's point is well made. This is not something that interests try in its current form is not something that interests the type level. But we're not defining, or we're not. Everybody's not involved in this just to get now two parties, TypeSafe and Typelevel, involved. This is now a community process that anyone can adopt and run with, if, and that's the big if, they've got the time, patience, and energy to do it. Like I said, it's not just about a SIP. It's not just about a, hey, wouldn't it be cool if this is done? Make it so, number one. Nope. You kind of step up and you're like, I'm going to sponsor this. I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. I'm sponsoring this. I'm doing the work. I'm going to try and get it through the process.
I would like to mention, in case it's not common knowledge, that SBT already supports saying I want to compile and run my code with this custom Scala jar at this location, and so there already isn't too much technical. Oh, okay. So now I'll get the real story.
There's a minor caveat. There's a bug in that, which we discovered in Scala Virtualize. But yeah, it generally works. Just make sure your version number has some weird thing at the end of it too. It can't be exactly the same version number.
I've heard of companies, needing some really important bug fix, and so they would just publish their own internal fork and point SBT to it, and Bob's your uncle.
Yeah, you can sort of do that.
Steph, I think you've just hit on another problem in this whole thing, which is because I've never needed to do that before, partly because I've never needed to do that before, until you said that, I had no idea that feature was available in SBT, buggy or not. And this is so true.
That's a common problem in SBT.
It's a common problem in
I didn't know
within the community.
These are so great.
You know what I love when you give a talk in SBT? You're like, okay, how many people typed the help command? Nobody.
There's a help command?
We spent a whole bunch of time making sure help shows everything in the tasks to just give you a starting point.
The help command makes your personal cell phone ring. Is that correct?
Yeah, apparently.
I actually legitimately didn't know help was a thing in it.
You type SBT help, and a voice comes up and says, "OnStar, what can I do for you?"
Yeah. Normally when I'm stuck on SBT, I usually just start typing characters and hit tab, and then if nothing happens, I'll backspace one and I'll hit tab again, and then I'll see what I can sort of discover.
Incidentally, just.
Anyway.
Super quick, completely unrelated tangent. Since I mentioned OnStar, a friend of mine once with OnStar was driving at night, and he presses OnStar, and he's just like, "Talk to me. I'm driving through the night. I'm afraid I'm going to go to sleep. You have to keep me awake." And this OnStar guy talked to him nonstop for 4 hours to keep him awake while he was driving. I just thought that might be
Will the SBT help command do that?
I don't think so.
Talk to me, Josh.
But it could.
Please.
Yeah, SBT.
This build is taking too long. Can you talk to me while it builds?
You need to talk me through the night.
SBT, I'm pulling an all-nighter. Help keep me awake.
Well, we did. There was Doug Tangren has a notifier plugin that I hooked up the Nyan Cat song to. So every time your tests fail, it would just continuously play until they pass.
By the way, I can't get that working, which is unfortunate because I really want to use it.
Oh man, well it's kind of stale at this point. I think it was for SBT 011 or something.
It also depends on Growl, which is basically not a thing anymore.
What? Something happened in Mac and I didn't pay attention for 2 years?
Growl was the shit.
Growl was the greatest thing ever, but it's like basically no one's using it anymore because Apple saw Growl and was like, "Hey, we're going to Sherlock you," and now they're in the Notify Center.
Nice. Well, anyway, we should get back on track.
Back BS.
Yeah. In fact, I think that maybe we should start doing community questions.
Let's do the next question. This one has +3.
Well, the next highest one is in response. So maybe we should do. Okay, hold on. We have. Naftoli said about 4 things, and I don't know which one this is in response to. So Naftoli Guggenheim, we'll do his +2 first. He says, wouldn't they better be served by put their efforts into Dotty?
So, gosh, that's a big question, and after talking to Miles, I think that the answer there, to paraphrase, and I'll probably do a bad job of this, is there's a lot of unknowns about Dotty. People aren't really sure what it means yet. It's still very researchy, and I think there's a lot of concern that, Dotty isn't their priority. It's a different group's priority, and I think it would be nice to see more. I think it would be nice to see more public interest in Dotty. Honestly, I'm not sure it's quite ready for the public scrutiny yet. I think it's very, very early for Dotty.
It's really not.
Yeah. It's pretty much an EPFL research project. It's kind of like in the past, in the early days of Scala, EPFL research projects got committed directly into core and then released.
Those were the days. Oh,
those were wonderful.
Oh man, you would wake up one morning, there'd be a point release of Scala, and something was completely new and different and completely untested.
The whole syntax changed. Yeah.
I know. It's like the Wild West.
So we don't necessarily want to go back to that, but yeah, Dotty is. I mean, they're still trying to prove out. They have the calculus for the type system.
Yeah.
But that's only step 1 of a many-step. It's a 10-step process. You go through a little calculus. You go through a little denial.
Not a 12-step.
It's only 10. Yeah.
Okay.
Then there's anger with the calculus. And
there's some anger. Yeah.
The imperfections.
But it's 10 in hexadecimal though. So.
Oh man.
No, I think that the way things are, pretty much organizing themselves, people interested in Dotty should be working in Dotty, and there should be mechanisms for people interested in other aspects to work on those. This is not rocket science. This is open source 101. It comes back to the cathedral and the bazaar. It's scratch your own itch, basically, is how open source works. And yeah.
With Dotty, I know there's tentative plans when it's ready. I know that they've thrown it at various code bases. Like they threw it at the Scala C code base because it's the easiest one to throw it at. I think they started throwing it at other code bases like maybe akka or something. Relatively less intense Scala types just to see how it does. But I think the eventual goal, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the community build, where they built almost 1 million lines of Scala code for Scala 2.11 to make sure it was compatible. I think the goal of Dotty is to do that and just see how it fares, right? That's almost the TCK of Scala at this point.
Yeah.
We're going to take every single open source project out there and build it and see if the tests pass.
Yeah. And that's, I can think of worst compatibility tests. than that. That's a pretty democratic, open sourcey thing to do. Is let's build them all, run them all, and see what breaks.
If you couldn't think of worse ones, I would say you're not a real engineer. Come on.
Oh, there's plenty of worse ones.
Yeah. So I think that they're planning to do that, but yeah, as it stands, that is still very experimental. Like I would, like pre-SIP stage, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, that reminds me. I wanted to return briefly, hop back, pop a couple of stack frames. Somebody, I forget. I think it was one of these that we already answered. Was why not have? Yeah, it was the one that said Typelevel sounds like a great kind of place to experiment, and then submit a SIP. And there are plenty of horrible failure examples from the JCP, but some of the most successful JCP projects have done exactly that. They've done a bunch of prototyping, a bunch of experimental work, found out what works and what doesn't work, and then submitted the JSR based on actual knowledge of, we tried 5-6 different ways and only this one worked. And then you actually submit the JSR, or the SIP in this case, based on some preliminary work that showed this turned out to be a really bad idea and this other way turned out to be a good one. So I just wanted to mention that, as it's not like the JCP is all bad. There are things that can be learned from any process, and if you look at the most successful JSRs, they have tended to do that. They've tended to be less led by, hey, let's do this, everybody come over this way and let's run in this direction for a bit. And they've been much more like, okay, we know roughly what we want to do. Let's prototype, experiment, get something that kind of works, learn from the mistakes, and then submit the JSR in a fairly complete state that, there's a reasonable confidence that it'll work. So yeah, let's pop back down the stack again.
I'm a fan of that style of development in general.
Yeah.
We tend to do. Well, we tend to do that. So this is something I was on the Activator team, and we're starting to do it a little bit with SVT. But you start with a branch and experiment. Like, I don't know if you've seen, just rewrote all of logging in SVT as an experiment to see what I can learn. That branch will never see the light of day. I mean, it's on GitHub. You can look at it if you want, but it will never, ever see the light of day, and I don't care that no one will ever use that code, because the whole point is to learn how I really need to do it. Yeah. And that kind of development is perfectly fine and acceptable, and I think should be encouraged, because by the time you actually write your legitimate code, it's a lot cleaner.
Depending on the phase of development, obviously it changes when you're getting close to a release or something, but I'd estimate that even during, on real projects, paid projects that I'm working on, between a half and 2/3 of the feature branches I make are abandoned at some point because they turned out to be a bad idea. And you're like, okay, let's keep trying this, push it a bunch, and then you're like, oh, that didn't work. And you just kind of switch back from that feature branch in GitHub. You keep it around as a sort of reference to yourself as, well, maybe there are a couple of ideas that we can adapt or go back to. But a lot of those feature branches get abandoned, and I think that's good. That's a healthy thing. So,
I have a skeptical question, which is, do we believe that substantial changes to the Scala compiler of the sort that the Typelevel people want, do we believe that anyone can do those changes if it isn't their full-time job?
Yeah.
I think.
Or is it just too hard?
I would phrase it as, if anyone can, it's going to be the people who have been using Scala the longest that can do it and know it can do it. So.
From what I know of Miles, I would say he is definitely a person who could do such a thing. From what I know of Eric Osheim, I would say he is another person I think could do such a thing. Eric and Miles have been Scala C contributors for a long time, and they've done lots of tedious work, which is basically the tail end of getting one of these features in. So if anyone could make it happen and do the long haul, I think these guys actually could.
Wait, are either of those guys actually experts on Scala compiler internals?
Miles again? I mean, not just.
I know Miles is. I'm sure Miles is an expert on bugs in the Scala compiler that stop him from doing what he wants to do. But that's a different thing, right?
Well,
he
remember
works on the Scala
that Miles is best known for working on the Scala Eclipse plugin, according to his Scala Days profile.
and the Eclipse plugin was built right on the Scala compiler. Like, Miles has a lot of internal Scala compiler knowledge.
Yeah.
It might not. I mean, so the thing about the Scala compiler is you don't necessarily know all of it. Like, there's the actual type system itself, which, again, like, given the stuff that Miles does, I think he has a pretty good understanding of it. There's the front end, the typer, the namer phase, that sort of thing, lambda lifting. Then there's the actual back end component as well. And even within the compiler team at TypeSafe, there tend to be people fragmented between different phases of specialities. So you kind of need that as you work. Eric Osheim, worked on the specialization stuff a lot. So it's not like you're just a compiler expert. But the other thing is, the timeline doesn't have to be like super, super fast. You're right that an expert will get it done really quickly. But again, I think the best thing that could happen, like, one of the really good things that I hope happens out of this is we get more people who are compiler experts and have the chops and can make changes and improvements quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you need to gain that in some fashion. So,
has anyone proposed making a sort of coffee script for Scala, like a language that relates to Scala as CoffeeScript relates to JavaScript, which is you put a new surface syntax on top of it that forbids some of the things in the language that you're trying to avoid, and then you just compile to Scala and reuse the rest of the toolchain as is.
Yeah, man, that's macros, isn't it?
So Wart Remover tries to do some of that, and it does a fairly good job with what it can do, but like a lot of the issues that one would want to avoid in sort of a stricter version of Scala, where you're willing to sacrifice some things, you can't really do at a surface level like that. So, for example, imagine trying to do a CoffeeScript style thing to forbid and completely segregate null out of the language. Like, keep it around for use in FFI, but make it such that you have to work really hard to do it, and it's not like a value that you can just run into at an arbitrary point. At first, it seems pretty easy to do something like that. But if you do something like that in the most obvious way, you get the not null trait, and we all know how that worked out. So it's actually, like, Scala is a profoundly more complex language than JavaScript, which is really saying something, and Martin would crucify me for saying that. But it's very complicated, and there's a lot of moving parts, and you want to pull one feature out. You can't just mask its syntax and hope that it goes away. So I don't think a CoffeeScript style effort would be successful.
There's another thing I'm going to throw out there, in that the compiler needs to do work for Scala, and for anything that you would build on top of Scala, you're going to want a type system. I mean, it would be ridiculous to throw an untyped language on top of Scala.
This is because then you'd get all of the non-safety of the type untyped language and all of the compile times of an enormously typed language.
Yeah, that was going to be my second point. Is now you have to run actually two compilers, because you have to run a whole type system and compiler, and then you have to throw that through Scala. So that's actually.
It'd be like those times where SPT is like compiling 1 file, compiling 5 files, compiling 13 files, compiling 27 files. But you would get to like 106 files after incrementing up like that, and then it would start at the beginning again and do it another time, because you'd have 2 compiler layers.
So it should stop at 3, man. 3 should be everything.
Yeah,
that's a heuristic.
It won't compile more than 3 files, and if that's
No. So the way SPT works is it aggressively, so it tries to do as few as possible the first time. The second time it does a relative closure and tries to compile a decent group to hopefully avoid anything else again. And then if it fails, then screw it.
Just do everything.
Let's do everything else. We failed. So, I'm sorry. Here's our money.
I have not gotten a 3+ duration compile for a really long time. The last time I got one was when I was working on Scala C. And at that point, I was able to get it up to like 4 or 5.
If you were working on Scala C, you weren't using SBT.
This was like an experimental build or something like that.
Oh, and then the reason why it was compiling it 3 or 4 times is because the experimental build in SBT recompiled Scala itself 3 or 4 times, and then you would incremental that.
So it was cheating. It was
Yes.
getting its compile times up through nefarious and illicit means.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a complete tangent. We should answer more community questions.
I agree. I was just going to suggest that.
So there's,
Okay.
I like Stu's question here. So
Well, we never finished Brian McKenna's answer to Naftali, but I think it's probably okay. I mean, wait, let's just do it.
But his got upvoted so much. Okay.
It's the same as Stu's. I like Stu's, but I want to finish the one from Naftali. So he responds to Naftali saying, "There's been a lot of discussion, but it hasn't been public. There are many examples of things which TypeSafe aren't interested in, but the Typelevel community is. For example, partially applied types." And I think this refers to partially applied types is the type lambda syntax we were talking about earlier. That's what the kind projector project does. As a compiler plugin with some fun syntax, and I believe, and I could be wrong, that there was a mailing list discussion about adding it to the language, and it was shot down. And this was like 4 years ago or something.
Well, so it was shot down 4 years ago, but it is actually coming in the language now. It's on the roadmap. Partially applied types are coming, and they're coming with the syntax that the type level people like. What they don't like is just how far in the future that is.
Yeah.
So I see. So it's just slow.
It's just slow, yeah. So this is something that's a daily pain for anyone who uses some of the higher order abstractions in Scala Z. It's a daily pain if you're doing type level programming at all, really. And getting it fixed will just shave so much completely random cruft out of my source code.
Yeah. Yeah. Combined with actual typer explosions, that's my experience. So
yeah.
Anyway.
The last thing Brian says is you can't just submit a PR, pull request, which is that's definitely true. It also, I think, should not be the case that you can just submit a pull request. I think the SIP, the SIP part of the equation is hugely important. Okay, SIPs, you justify what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, you document how you're trying to do it. All of those things should be done for a language change, and the work to do the language change. This is not a free ride, and I don't think anybody who's asking for it wants it to be, but it should be, the expectation should be, there is a ton of work to do if you're going to do something like this. If you are committed enough to do it, then great, that's brilliant. But just saying, I hacked this up over the weekend, here's a pull request that implements, flurdles in Scala for, just because I felt like it. No, that's not good enough. What's the justification? What's the documentation? All of that should be addressed.
I just think meme embedding is really important.
Lolcats in Scala.
Yeah. Actually, so my most recent one was I wrote a Doge language, or Dogi language.
I saw, that I was enjoying you reading that.
Anyway, that one really deserves in Scala, I think. But
much wow.
I'm going to send a PR. That's what I'm going to do. See what happens.
Yeah, just send the PR with no other explanation at all.
It deletes the entire
isolation.
Compiler. The entire compiler for
look, guys, it's like minus 30,000 lines.
Look, I cleaned up all the bugs.
Yeah.
Deleting code is my #1 favorite refactoring.
All the bugs you knew of are gone.
All bugs. Yeah, exactly.
So, Stu is asking, is there some fear that contributions would ever not get accepted? So that sounds like one that might have trouble.
The CLA is really, really, really important. So if I can be pedantic here as not a lawyer, the CLA is a really, really, really important thing for anybody who is like a company larger than 2 who wants to use Scala. This is like serious legal stuff here. So anything that gets PR'd back into Scala where Scala, not Typelevel Scala, but Scala. Everybody who contributed to that would need to have signed a CLA at some point.
Yeah.
That's really, really important.
Yeah, it's just the way the legal system works is any company that incorporates changes that that violate some kind of copyright, they're liable for that.
Copyright, patent indemnification, like the
all
whole whack. And because of the way the U.S. copyright system works, if you don't sign things over like that, and you're not being paid, things are in very, very dodgy territory. And essentially, like, you could be a company using Scala, right? And then some random contributor who contributed to Typelevel and it got pulled into Scala without them signing a CLA could show up at your door and be like, hey, I'm asserting my rights to this code. And you can't really stop them because they own that code. It's the act of creation that they own.
Yes, they have a little bit of Doge code in the Scala.
I was just going to say that those Doge guys they're gonna carpet bomb Scala with like copyrighted code so that they can then position Doge as the alternative.
The premier altcoin.
Yeah, the safe alternative to Scala. Look, Scala's it's the Santa Cruz operation business model all over.
Yeah, I saw this on a movie called Planet of the Doggy.
So I don't really know what the Typelevel people are going to do to address this, because I'm like, dealing with CLAs is a pain, and dealing with someone else's CLA is like way more of a pain. I would assume that pretty much everybody who's a core developer on Typelevel has already signed the CLA, but people submitting PRs to them aren't.
Wouldn't be that hard for Typelevel to just say, look, everyone sign EPF the Scala CLA first. Right?
Yeah,
it would cost them nothing, and it's a pretty standard CLA, I think.
Yeah, I think the Scala CLA, I don't remember who hosts it, but I know, so EPFL owns the CLA for Scala, and there's an automated, like, pull request checker that, like, anytime pull request comes in, you can say, sign the CLA.
It occurs to me at this point that we should listen to the feedback we got and actually define for people who might not know what a CLA is.
Oh, but we already failed, because we had the whole discussion.
We did.
Okay, so store the discussion in your mind and search replace the following terms.
CLA is a TLA.
It is a three-letter acronym.
It's a three-letter acronym that means Contributor License Agreement. It's a legal agreement between you and an open source project about your code. When you contribute, you sign this agreement that says the code I give you is under this license.
Correct. Yeah, that's what we need to say.
Not only under this license, but also I am giving you a royalty-free, indefinite license to use this code.
And beyond that, I have I was going to say, beyond that, it also kind of says I have the right to promise that as well. I haven't ripped this code off from somebody else and am presenting it as some kind of Apache licensed thing when in fact it's not. All of those things are covered legally, so that you basically. It's another TLA. It's a CYA. Cover your ass.
Yeah. So this kind of comes back to an element of copyright law that basically anyone who is a developer should be familiar with, but most people aren't. Which is that at least in the U.S. and the EU and a couple of other realms, when you write code, you are performing what is legally defined as an act of creation.
Yeah.
And it's like if you were painting on a canvas.
That sounds heavy. Like I'm having a child. It's an act of creation.
It's legally defined as an act of creation, and that is what the copyright system is all about. Yeah. So you have copyright of that code that you created. Now, even if this line is like character for character the same as someone else's Hello World, you still have copyright on it. And there's some carve-outs in the copyright system for various countries to deal with things like artists who are working for companies, right? So if you're signed to a record label, right, or if you're a developer who's paid to write code for Google, right? How do those copyrights get assigned? There's carve-outs for that, but there aren't really carve-outs for open source. So open source projects have to go through these really weird sort of sideways turn things in order to make sure that their copyright provenance is really, 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 really clear, because they're not paying anyone. These aren't contractors, they're not legally employed. And so copyright assignment needs to be really explicit, and that's what the contributor license agreement does. And that's why it's so important.
And if you ever contribute code to a project that doesn't have one, you should hold it ransom later.
if you
could, I
code
guess.
to a project that doesn't have one, you should really think twice. It's everybody who shares code on the internet really should be using these. And if you don't want to write one yourself, use Apache or use GPL or use something.
Yeah, use protection, CLAs, licensing.
I mean, this is just to get serious for a second. This is why GPL, Apache, BSD licenses. This is why they exist. Is unless you say otherwise, your code is automatically copyrighted. You need to take action to legally say, I am giving up some or all of those rights and allowing this code to be used. Basically indemnifying other people against the risk of using that code for what they need to use it for.
Yeah, this is why corporations don't like GPL, because it doesn't give over enough rights for the corporation to be happy.
Yeah, so it's why corporations don't like GPL, and it's also, this is very interesting, it's also why corporations don't like many other licenses. So if you're using LGPL, if you're using CPL, if you're using even BSD or MIT, you're in very legally uncertain territory because they don't have explicitly attached contributor license agreements. Apache, GPL, EPL, and some of the other very, very specific derivations have these contributor license agreements. So they're very good licenses to use. They're very corporate friendly in the sense that they know what they're getting. But if you just give them a hunk of like BSD licensed code, it's a legal time bomb.
I like the DPL myself, Dick's Public License.
Or there was the do whatever the heck you want license.
That's basically MIT.
Yeah.
It's like, don't sue us.
No, MIT, that's too fancy for me, man. I want the one that has curse words in it.
Dick's Public License is just share the love, man.
I think it's WFYP, what you really please.
Well, so remember, wasn't there? I think this was the JSON, the original JSON library, right? Had a clause in it that said "Don't be evil," right? That was the only restriction it had. And then there's this fantastic story that Crawford would tell, where it's basically like everybody was fine with this, until along came IBM. And then the legal department from IBM was like, we want to be able to use this, but we
want to be able to use it for evil.
We can't really get behind this clause.
We want to be able to use it for evil. We want to be able to use it for world domination, murder, mayhem.
They were just like, well, we can't. You can't really define evil for us, and we're it was this deep philosophical thing. They needed a carve out.
I agree that clause actually violates the open source definition. You're not allowed to discriminate against classes of users.
You have a point. Yes, it's not very open if they disallow all of the evil uses.
I think maybe we just allow lawful evil, but we get rid of chaotic evil.
Chaotic.
What
What about neutral evil? Is neutral evil allowed?
Yeah, I think that's acceptable. That's okay. As long as it's not chaotic evil. There's just one class of people. Anyway.
All right. So
I think we're done with
back
that
to the
question.
questions.
We have it's WTFPL. What you please.
What the
license.
fork?
What? Yeah, we're trying to keep our ratings so we can be on iTunes and children can listen. Okay.
Yeah, because children will listen to this and thoroughly enjoy it.
Dude, my kids actually listened to it one time. It was a little. Yeah. Okay. And then the next question we have one thing regarding type level lambdas. It would be great to pick a syntax which would align with future Scala, so the TLS code would just work when the new type system hits mainline. Agree?
Let me pause that again, because apparently I've had too much wine for that to make sense the first time through. One thing regarding type level lambdas, it would be great to pick a syntax which would align with the syntax planned for future Scala, so that TLS code would just work.
Does he mean TLC code?
No,
I think they mean TLC.
Typelevel Scala, I think, is what TLS is, and TLC is the type level compiler.
Man, people move so fast with these TLAs. It's hard to keep up.
So the syntax that is being proposed for the future inclusion into Scala, right, which comes from Dotty, that syntax is generally highly favored by the type level community. Like, everybody was very much behind that. So I really don't see any reason why they would deviate from that. It basically is the syntax that a lot of them were fighting for a really long time.
Yeah. All right, so let's go to the next one, which is I think we should have even more forks like Typelevel Scala. For instance, the whole Project Valhalla thing. Value types and real generics would be a worthy fork where people could prototype the details without disturbing mainline development. This I highly agree with. There are things in the Scala ecosystem that I would love. Like, I even want a fork of SBT that uses the JDK7 file API, because we're stuck on Java 6 right now, and it's really painful.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's yeah. I don't think. Do any of us disagree with this, or are we all in violent agreement with Simon?
I think the key is
form to my vision for Scala.
Daniel's true colors now shine forth.
Daniel, there's a new language called Dogi that you should check out. Take ownership of. No, so the thing that I want to mention that Simon brings up is value types and generics. Reified generics, I believe, are just being discussed as potentials for the JVM. And there's yeah, I know. So value types, I think, have real potential with JVM support. Some of the proposals I've seen are kind of interesting in that I think they have a chance of getting implemented. The technical details are somewhat saddening at times. Where you're like, oh man, I wish we could just break compatibility and then it would be awesome, but you can't. But value types at a JVM level means that the value classes in Scala can just start to use them and immediately clean up a whole bunch of issues. And real generics, reified generics, I don't know why he calls them real generics, reified versus erased. I'm actually more nervous about reified generics. I'm afraid that it'll break our type system, and we'll have the same problem we had trying to implement to .NET, where the Scala type system is more advanced than Java's, and so reified generics actually break it. That's the huge concern. I really hope the JVM does not do that, but that's something that I guess the question is, should we get people on those committees? Should the Scala community be involved in the discussion? Should TypeSafe, should EPFL, should Typelevel? I'd say yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. If these things are, and I think there's a very strong chance, if these, if real generics is a bad idea, surely it's worth trying it out to see not only is it a bad idea, but in what ways is it a bad idea, and what can we learn from this very bad idea that we had. So yeah. I think that I think we agree.
All right, so let's do 2 more questions, then we'll be done. Okay.
I want to nominate a question from farther down, which is Naftoli asks, is this blog post just Miles throwing out an idea, or was there a lot of discussion already somewhere? Where? And this is a more finalish announcement.
I can definitely cover that one, which is no, this is not just a random idea or Miles kind of deciding to lash out or something like that. No, this is I'm convinced after having spoken with him and from everything else I've seen, this is very thought through. This is very, very deliberate. There's nothing knee jerk about this. This is something Miles has put a ton of thought into, and I'm sure the rest of the Typelevel crew, although I haven't talked to them directly, this is something that's been coming for a long time, and it's been well thought through.
Yeah, this is to expand on that. It really hasn't just been Miles. I mean, and this has been something that's been talked about actually for a long time, and bandied around both publicly and privately. Is kind of like, well, what if we could do this? What if we could do that? I mean, I know, like, I don't know. I mean, people have been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah.
I think what was really surprising was Miles kind of put a tweet out. I think
It was
about
like a week ago or 2 weeks
like a week ago, where he was basically like, well, so if there were this fork out here, would anyone care? And there was a huge response to it. So, and both publicly and privately, and he kind of passed that on, and it was like, oh, okay, well, there's actually interest in this. Okay, well, what would this look like? And that's where this came from. So this is very definitely not just like Miles putting out this crazy idea. This is a very collaborative thing. A lot of the people in the Typelevel community
it is
were
a little
very
odd.
involved with this.
It is a little odd that there aren't more names, more signatures at the bottom of this Declaration of Independence.
Not everyone agreed with Ben Franklin. We don't have to hang together. Miles can hang by himself.
And then afterwards, we'll join in and sign the next document. That's what that's what happens.
We'll let the first people get their heads put on spikes, and then we'll bravely come up behind and.
Yeah, I think it's actually a technological limitation of the blog engine that's being used, honestly, because someone has to be on the post, and Miles actually did compose this, so.
Yeah.
But it was reviewed and edited by basically everyone.
Yeah.
So there's actually one more really good question I want to ask, by the way. You ready?
Yes.
So, since I feel like we did that. Okay, so this was, are there any examples of Scala improvement process proposals which didn't go anywhere but really should have been accepted?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
So I from my tenure as the SIP guy, there were proposals that I thought were great proposals that never had legitimate implementations that could be accepted.
And that's fair enough. If you don't do that, you can't. I don't think you can expect to get your SIP through.
So what are some examples?
The only one that I really wanted to see get through was there was a way of injecting source code position. This one actually had an implementation, but there was a way of injecting source code position and line number and stuff with implicits. So like if you're running a testing library, you could grab.
I wanted that SIP so bad.
Yeah, that's the only one that I was kind of sad that it didn't make it, and there was a legitimate reason for it not going in. I don't remember what it was, but that one was really. I thought it was kind of pretty well laid out and very quickly implemented. So
that one was. I remember that one now. That was quite a while ago, and I was dancing in the aisles. That one. That was just so cool.
Yeah, I think eventually macros give you a means to just do that without.
They do now. They do.
Yeah. So I think that was actually the reason that it got rejected, was that it competed with a different language feature that was intended to solve the problem.
Well, the crazy thing was this was a really long time ago, though. Remember, Josh? Like this was back in the day where everyone was, where like Martin and a couple other people were like, yeah, we're gonna do macros. We read this paper and it's gonna be great. And everybody was talking about how like macros are gonna solve all these problems. So I think a lot of things kind of got dismissed out of turn because it's like macros are gonna be here tomorrow and they're gonna make it great. And then 4 years goes along.
To be fair, I was on the review committee. There was already a macro implementation at this point.
Really?
Yeah, there was already a macro implementation. It was going into that release of Scala when that evaluation was done.
Wow, so it couldn't have been as long ago as I thought.
It was experimental.
I'm glad that macros came up, because here's like a big question about this whole thing, which is like, if Scala has macros, it has compiler plugins, why do you need to fork the language if you have all this stuff?
So what is the big thing that a compiler plugin can never, ever do with the language? Trivia question.
Replace typer.
Well, okay,
the
more fundamental thing that it can.
That was going to be my guess, was like really do anything with the type checker.
You can do actually a lot with the type checker, but you can't replace stuff that's already there. But more importantly, you can't touch the syntax. You're bounded within the syntax. So you're bounded within the front end and you're bounded within the back end. So you can't do any meaningful optimizations. You can't do any syntax changes, and you can't really remove any type checks which are extant. So that bounds you in this tiny, tiny, tiny little box here. And inside that tiny little box, you can do fun things, but that's about all you can do.
Well, it's a bigger box than you might think, though. I mean, that you can the thing that you can do with Scala compiler plugins that you can't do with macros right now is you can get in early enough to basically take code that wouldn't type check and manipulate it into code that will type check before the typer gets there.
But heaven help you if you need any type context to do that.
That's right. Yeah, when you do that, you take on a lot of responsibility for filling in basically a lot of crap yourself because you don't get much help from the... Yeah, until the typer phase is run, you don't get a lot of value.
Touch certain parts of the tree, because if you do, then sort of bad things will happen and explode. Like, so you basically, you can get your plugin in like right after the parser, right? But before the typer runs. And so you can basically pretend you're like for comprehensions, right? Where things parse into like this tree, and then you take that tree and you kind of munge it around, right? So you can do that, but you munge that tree in a complete vacuum. You are effectively moving around S expressions, but more complex than S expressions, right?
The other thing that we legitimately do all the time, and I don't know if people realize this, but when you run, say, SVT, you're not actually running Scala's main. You're running a secondary main that has additional phases thrown in, where we can do whatever the hell we want. We can just replace the front end and the back end if we really wanted to. We don't, but we do when you compile a .svt file. That we actually replace Scala itself, the global, and redo how it's laid out. So you can, it's no longer a plugin, it's actually a complete replacement, but you can do that and keep the same backend as Scala and generally be binary compatible.
Yes, so this is taking advantage of the fact that the Scala C's implementation is modular in some very, very, very specific and limited ways. And if your use case falls into those categories of modularity, which some use cases do, like SBT's .sbt files, you can do some very powerful things by kind of mix and matching what you put together in the compiler. Scala C isn't very modular in some other ways, so don't get your hopes too far up about what you can do here. But you can do some amazing things, and you can do different things with macros, and you can do different things with compiler plugins. Yeah. I think Typelevel's point is that you can't do the full set of things that they want to be able to do as easily and as much in a unified framework. You certainly can't do it with just compiler plugins because that's Wart Remover. Wart Remover is trying to do that, and it's having a really hard time of it. So,
well, the other point they make in the and a very well made point is, Scala C does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a much larger ecosystem. I know from writing a compiler plugin, one of the first things you face is if you actually modify code that won't type check into code that will, none of the IDEs are going to understand that. None of the other tools are going to understand that. They're all going to say there's errors in your code. The compiler will be happy with it, assuming the compiler plugin's there, but you're going to get red all over your code, and it's a bigger picture item than just, hey, we're going to change we're going to add a Scala compiler plugin that remakes Scala in our image. No, you can't just do that and have a healthy ecosystem around that. There's a lot more involved than that, and that's it's not that that's not true for changing the Scala compiler itself either. Yeah. Same problems are going to exist.
Yeah. Hey guys, Naftali just pointed out something really. We're running low on time, and Naftali pointed out we forgot something major, which is we haven't even mentioned Martin's response to this.
This is true. Yeah.
I haven't actually read Martin's response. I didn't realize there was one.
Yes, it's on blog.typesafe.com about TypeSafe commitment to Scala. I didn't mention it because I don't know how much I can say. I guess I think that his response is well said.
Yeah. I think it's very well said. I mean,
it basically says go for it, right? Be my guest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at it from any sensible perspective, and one of the things Miles says, if I encourage anyone who's listening to this or watching this who hasn't read Miles's post to go and read it and really read it. I mean, look at the nuances, look at what's said. One of the things he says clearly in there is TypeSafe is doing what they should do. They're a business entity in it to, they're paying engineers to work on Scala compiler and libraries and stuff like that. That money's got to come from somewhere. They're a commercial entity. They need to follow what makes sense for them commercially. That doesn't mean that it suits the rest of the the rest of the community, and it's hard to see a downside to the community getting more involved and producing more code that potentially could benefit everybody. So this shouldn't come as a surprise that generally it's seen as kind of a positive thing. The key here is Miles is talking about, and Typelevel talking about compatible fork, merging fork, not
actually,
divergent.
Related to that, we have a really good question with a ton of upvotes about, with all the discussion, it seems like it's time for a proper spec. Typelevel Scala proposes to largely replicate what Scala C does, even if it's not the best idea. Without a spec, are some of the weird corner cases as designed or a defect? I think a lot of the holes in the spec are around type inference.
Yeah, there's holes in type inference. There's actually some stuff which is still actually slightly incorrect with respect to the kind system, because the kind system, the kind system as it exists in the compiler isn't really a thing. It just sort of is things that the compiler allows to type check that it normally wouldn't. So there's a lot of very unspec'd behavior in there. There's actually existing stuff where the kind system kind of interacts with dependent types in a very strange way that Adrian still insists is a bug, but is unspec'd, so nobody really knows, and it hasn't been fixed in like 5 years.
It's not a bug unless it violates something that's written down somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's highly dubious behavior, and it's really, really, really dodgy that you can do this, but nobody knows, and there's real code out there that's using it. So
I guess the point is, what do you mean by compatibility? And I think there are two levels of compatibility here, right? There is, if I compile code on Typelevel Scala C or whatever, TLC, can I use it with libraries compiled against standard Scala C? Is it binary compatible in that fashion? The other thing is, if I compile code with Typelevel Scala, will it work with regular Scala C, or can I load it in regular Scala C and use it? And I think if you start diverging in the type system and implicit resolution stuff, the code examples may not translate. Your surface syntax could actually differ, but binary, you're compatible, right? You still work. I don't know which level of compatibility they're going after there.
That's interesting. Sorry, Daniel, go on.
So the goal is specifically this. Anything that compiles with mainline Scala C should compile and produce the same semantic result with TLC without any flags. Things that compile in TLC, even without flags, may not necessarily compile in Scala C.
Well, I would have expected the opposite. Actually, that surprises me to hear.
So the goal. Well, think about type lambdas, right, or partially applied type syntax, right? So partially applied type syntax is not something that you could compile in Scala C right now. None of those examples would work. But you could write an example that would compile with TLC, and that would work just fine. Or you could write a version that just uses the existing sort of structural type lambdas thing, and compile it with Scala C, and then go and compile it with TLC, and it would work just fine. So a lot of people are like, well, the TLC is about removing things from the language. That's going to happen, but it's going to happen behind flags. So if you want to get rid of nulls, for example, you're going to have to do like -w null or something like that. You're going to have to actually ask for it. So the goal, well, actually, I think.
So there's going to be like Bizarro World SIP 18.
Yeah, exactly. Undo SIP 18. But So there's going to be a whole set of flags that change some things and give you some different behaviors. And this might be where maybe contravariant implicits could be handled via this. That was another question. Here's the other side of it, binary compatibility. Anything compiled with TLC, regardless of the flags, should be loadable into Scala C.
Now that I find interesting because we don't have that between major versions of Scala right now.
No, we don't. So this is a stricter compatibility than we have with major versions of Scala. That is the goal.
So it's more like minor versions of Scala, but...
Yeah.
It's like minor versions of Scala, but you could have some surface level sort of differentiations. And you can have... So you can imagine that what they can do with this is a lot of really deep linting. A lot of really deep linting. like wart remover on steroids you can get out of this sort of project. You can get a lot of syntax changes, or syntax extensions, I should say. You can't actually like change the way that if-else works, for example. You wouldn't be able to do that because then Scala code wouldn't compile with TLC. But you can add things and add them in such a way that it's unambiguous. And so this is where you can get partial type application. So there's a lot of good stuff you can get while preserving these compatibility guarantees. And this means that the penalty for using this is essentially just the class path, right? So it's if you're a project that's using ScalaZ now, you could use TLC without a problem. And even if you're a library, you could still publish that library and people could use you from Scala. And as far as they're concerned, there's no difference. ScalaZ is still on your class path, whatever. But like all your TLC specific stuff is compiled out, and you just look like normal Scala.
I'm kind of blown away just as a meta comment that we're already using TLS and TLC as like standard TLAs after just about an hour of this discussion. It's become accurate.
So everyone knows Daniel coined that phrase.
TLC.
He is the author of TLC.
Yeah, I've been pushing that pretty hard over the last 12 hours.
And people listening to this will be like, why does Scala need tender loving care?
Speaking of 12 hours, it's past 1 a.m. for Seth and I. So.
Your dedication to the cause is noted, gentlemen.
If I wanted to get 12 hours of sleep tonight, it's going to be rough. That's what I'm saying.
One quick thing I noticed at the bottom, super quick, is Simon gets the award as being the most prolific question asker and
also,
comment maker.
Comment maker, maybe.
He gets the most prolific comment maker, and I believe it's 6 a.m.
Holy crap.
What?
Okay, that's dedication. You guys don't even come close.
It might be 7 a.m. It might be 7 a.m. But yeah, I believe in Germany. What time is it right now in Germany? Can anyone?
It's 7.
9 hours ahead. So
yeah. So he started at 6 a.m., 5:30 a.m. possibly watching this.
Yeah, 7.
So that is dedication, man.
But he did throw up a link which we'll chuck in the show notes to Scala's coffee script, which is Scalite. I just happened to notice down there, so I guess we'll make sure that makes it into the show notes somehow. Okay.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, that was fun. We should do this again soon. Sooner than 6 weeks.
Yeah, we're hoping to record more often now that we're not all on vacation. And
yeah.
We're hoping to, if you have any suggestions for, or you would like to be part of the show for a discussion, say about a project that you own and would like to discuss, or you happen to be in the video game industry because we had a specific request for video game talks about Scala, send us an email. It's thescalawags@gmail.com.
In particular, if you've written a Doctor Who themed game in Scala, I can tell you right now you'll be on the show.
Yes, guaranteed.
Because I'll make it happen.
If there's just a fedora on a guy in the game, that counts, and a phone booth. All right.
Excellent.
Anyway, thanks, guys.